we'd now like to invite up three of the leading analysts in the industry. We've got Don Spieth from Van Gas Analytics, George Ferguson from Bloomberg, and Richard Coe from Wings. And I think Richard's going first, but he's like last on the stage, which is great.
That's right.
Richard, over to you.
Right. Hello, everyone. WingX, no longer Wing.
You went through a Wings stage, though, didn't you?
WingX, part of JetNet Group. So, great. Well, this is not going to be mainly about presentation. I hope it's going to be about Al's very difficult panel questions. But we agreed we would put up a few slides just to show a little bit of context in terms of world of business aviation and the world of airlines, and how the last 5 years has seen differential trends across those two sectors. This behind me is the story of business jet activity since 2019. And what you can see is that we had this huge drop-off in 2020 during COVID, 75% drop in activity. What we're measuring there is global business jet sectors. That's what the y-axis measures. And then we're looking at month to month through the 5 years. So huge drop-off, 2020, we all know about that. 2021, really rapid recovery. 2022, essentially setting a new high, a new peak for our industry. And then what we saw in 2023 was a little bit of a drop-off, a little bit of erosion, and 2024, again, a little bit of erosion. But the overall picture you get is of this really substantial step change in activity. And I think it was Vivek saying yesterday that we saw 7 years worth of growth in just a couple of years. And we've seen that as well in terms of BizJet activity, and it's holding. So this is now a substantially larger industry in terms of global BizJet activity. Just to put that in global context, and also to start comparing it to the world of airlines, what you see under this global map, a few pie charts in case it may be rather small to read, but what they're showing is, first of all, that if we track all fixed wing aircraft activity, which we do globally, commercial, cargo, military, government, business aviation, the business aviation part of it is 13%. So that's how many sectors we're talking about. And then if we look at that number of sectors, what we cover in business aviation is everything from BizJet down to piston. What I'm showing on the map is BizJet and turboprop. That's our core BizAv market. Now that BizAv market is almost 70% US, so this is a very, very dominant market in terms of regions. And what the map shows is the trends in terms of jets plus turboprops, a little bit different from the slide before, jets plus turboprops. And you can see that in 2024, year to date, North America is trading behind 2023. This is a year-on-year view by 2.3%. Europe by a little bit less. But it's a tiny bit misleading there, because if you compare to 2019, the US is up by 25%, a little bit more than that. And if you compare to 2019, BizJet and turboprop activity in Europe is up by just 5%. So that's the context. Now let's just look at trends. And what I've done here is compared the airline recovery since 2019 versus BizJet recovery since 2019 in Europe. So this is just in Europe. And those two little charts on the right are measuring punctuality of airline service. What you can see from this chart is that just measured in terms of number of sectors, airlines in Europe have not recovered from 2019. They're still several points behind. And in fact, if we looked at regional airline connections, the deficit would be far greater. It is far greater. It's 30% below where we were in 2019 in terms of number of connections. Whereas business aviation, business jet activity in this case, even though it's relatively weaker than the US, it is stronger than we were in 2019. So for the traveler who's looking at the two options, just in terms of the number of connections available, the airlines in Europe do not offer the same quality of service. And clearly in terms of the punctuality, you can see, I hope from those charts, that where we were in 2019 measured by Eurocontrol is about 70%, and we've come down steadily since then in 2023 and 2024. In the US, The situation is a little bit different. The airlines have recovered just in terms of numbers of sectors flown. We are seeing slightly more sectors flown by airlines than in 2019 comparatively, but the BizJet activity is far, far stronger than it was in 2019. So just in terms of the recovery of that demand, far stronger in BizJet than in airlines. And although cancellations have been at a lower level than in Europe, which is what that column chart shows, almost all the surveys we read underpin the fact that BizJet users have moved into BizJet or using BizJet more because of the greater convenience and reliability. So I'm just going to finish with a couple of slides that just emphasize this rebound of BizAv versus airline at a city level. And this is BizJet versus airlines from key cities in the US. And essentially what you're seeing there is the share of all the outbound sectors which are BizJet compared to airline, just in terms of availability of number of sectors, and side by side the recovery. So, you know, some of these cities in terms of outbound airline have seen pretty strong recovery, almost as strong as for BizJet, but others, you know, notably in California, LA, San Francisco, if we measure the recovery in airlines, it's been very poor compared to BizJet. And really where the difference comes is in connectivity, because in terms of unique pairs, this is metro pairs, not just airports, but what we did was aggregate the airports around metro areas. You can see that BizJets in the US offer, what we're showing here is 25 times the number of metro connections as offered by the combination of these leading airlines. And, you know, we heard from Delta yesterday. If you look at Delta there, just a little over 3,000 unique city connections. Interestingly, I looked at Wheels Up, and they offer 20,000 so far in 2024, 20,000 metro connections. So perhaps the combination there is a good one for offering their travelers more connections. And we've got a case study here on Miami as well. Won't go into all the detail, but essentially what it shows is this extraordinary recovery or rebound in BizJet activity from the Miami metro area. This includes 7 airports, 75% more outbound BizJet connections from the metro area than in 2019, and a 30% increase in the number of unique connections. So you can see right next to, juxtaposed to airline, the advantages of getting a BizJet. Final picture, this is what's happening in Europe. There is the optics of business aviation, should we say, are very negative, and there is a lot of activist intervention and indeed government policy now looking in some ways to limit airline travel overall. And in fact, in France, it's one of 2 or 3 countries where there is a ban on certain short-haul flights. I recommend a website. It's called Chrono Trains. You can go to Chrono Trains and you can see exactly how far you can get in the 2.5 hours, which is the kind of mandated policy. Anything which you can get to in 2.5 hours on a train, the principle is you shouldn't take a plane. So what we did was compare the reach in terms of metro areas on the right-hand side of this chart with either a turboprop or a jet, and we compared that to exactly how far you could get on a train in 2.5 hours. And the number of metro connections you can see is just extraordinary in terms of business aviation being advantageous. That may not stop government policy, but those are the facts. Thanks.
That was great. Thanks, Richard. Don.
Nice job. Hi, I'm Don Spieth. I just have a slide up here. We have a lot of data that I'm going to show you for those that have seen my presentations before. We show quite a bit of data. That's out of Amstat. We get contribution from general aviation. I head up the company called Van Gas, and we also work with George Ferguson and bring in some of the data from Bloomberg Intelligence as well. What I thought I'd do is take some time to, another contributor is my 16-year-old daughter, who has humbled me to say that my charts look like a DNA test. And so she said I needed some infographics, so she contributed with some of that. She also humbled me to say that she did some research on some of the other CGIs, and she had to tailor things down to the old people like me that are in the audience. So what this shows here is hold time. Now, hold time is when a buyer procures the aircraft and then they sell the aircraft. That's whether it's a new delivery or whether it's used. It's all of the aircraft in existence in the active fleet as we go through time. So this shows all the way through, and if you look at the pandemic, you notice that decision time slowed, and that hold time got greater. We saw charts of that through the pandemic presentations. And then after the pandemic, through 2022, 2023, it came way down, that hold time, as we started to get things churning again. And now it's right back up to where that 5-year average is. So if we look at that, really, we're just above the 5-year average, kind of in a normalized situation. What I thought would be interesting is to show you a couple of facets. So when I talked about AMSTAT, I know a number of you are AMSTAT users. You have AMSTAT Premier, where we, VanGuest, we contribute to the analytics that go into the valuation tool. And what I thought would be neat is just to kind of show some of the things we've already heard. We already know that the industry is very healthy. But I'd look at days on market, and I don't panic at the numbers at the left, because this days on market is everything, okay? It's all of the stuff that stays on the market, not the stuff, some of it's filtered out, so the things that are on the market for 10 years have been filtered out. But this is a higher time than you would expect as a broker in here. I've also split this into what I'm calling 15U, and for those of you that have kids in sports, you kind of get a laugh at that, but anything 15 and under, and then 16 plus. And if you look at this, it's pretty interesting to see mostly the difference between an aged aircraft, which we look at 16 plus, and then under 15. Now, if you look at these days on market in the left-hand side of this margin towards the numbers, don't panic there, because what I wanted to do is get an average of bust to boom, boom to bust, or have both of those things in there, so that's why I went that far back in history, and just for you to see that along the historic time. But if you look at that first left-hand margin, that's actually the panic of the Great Recession, and a lot of people throwing their aircraft onto the market. So those days on market look like they're going low, just like they do on the right, but the reasons are different. Now, this is why when you hear people say, yeah, just look at the data, you have to look at the data, but you also have to know what's going on while you get that data, because your observations are going to be different for different reasons. And that's why you need the expertise that's in this room to kind of look at those subtle nuisances and understand what's going on. If you were to combine these two at the end of the ride right now, days on market, and this is inventory days on market. This is not deal time. I'm going to show you that next. But at the end of the ride, we're right around 325 days on market. That's in inventory. And if we were looking back at, say, 2019, where we last thought that was normal, or normal enough for business aviation, that's about 25% off. This is deal time. So this is the actual deals that are happening, the solds, okay? And it's important to know the difference between inventory. I hear absorption rate and all these terms that are maybe more inclined to be out of real estate, and they're good measures, but what we try to look at is very specific times. So if you look at this split right here, this is the chart that my daughter panicked on and said the whole DNA comment, but you can really see some neat things. So remember when we went through, like right now, Richard showed some really good graphics about how airlines are coming back, not to blow your thunder, but you're going to show some of those dispersions in regional. Well, whenever we got fuel going down so low, it was actually a headwind for us, right? And what happened was regionals grew. All of the commercial routes, regional grew, and that was a headwind. So you could see the U-15s, it actually lagged a little bit right there in the middle as you approached 2015, 16, by about 60 or 6 months, maybe a little bit more. And as we came out of that, it was maybe 90 days of a lead. But a very interesting kind of perspective. And if you look at deal time, excuse me, you'll see that at the end of the ride that we approach here, that things are kind of ramping back up, but they're settling. And if we were to look at maybe the last, 30 days, that would be more of a settle out. So we're stabilizing, and we're well below what that deal time was. So I know it's taking longer than it did when we were in the middle of the pandemic and you said, hey, buddy, you can come and look at it in the hangar, but if you're not going to kick the tires and fly it away, I got another guy just like you ready to buy it. That's not happening anymore, but the deal times are better. They've reset from where they were prior to the pandemic. So this is where I compare the actual, and now I've taken that U15, 16 plus out of it and just shown you the average across the board. So we did a rolling average, as we did before. And if you look at the transaction times, you see that bump. Now, again, this is where you see that prolific bump from the moderate headwinds that we saw from the fuel. And the interesting thing in this chart is where you look at this ride up on inventory at the 2000, say 20, right in this area, I can actually point to it, 2021, this peak. This is actually the good stuff going off. So remember after 2020, we thought, wow, everything's been picked through, right? And then we went for those other waves. This is the good stuff going off faster and the bad stuff holding up longer and longer. But then we get to that point where they both drop off the cliff because that's an inventory turn, right? Now we've reduced all of that heavy days on market inventory, but we're well below where we were historically. So if you look at this chart, it tells you we're in a healthy area, we're rebounding at a steady pace, and this is, as we go through and go into the future, you'll see this kind of a reset of inventory time, and hopefully transaction times will stay low. So another thing that I looked at, and we've all said, hey, fractional's killing it, and charter is dead. I mean, it sounded like we were gonna bury charter out back. You know, I think charter has had its challenges, but I think charter is still strong. So what I did is I took some of the numbers, and this is in a percentage basis. I said, how has the aircraft or aircraft available for charter grown percentage-wise? And you see that big ramp up at the beginning, and then you see through time where the available aircraft or the fleet size has grown for whole aircraft, and you see fractional just going off the chart here. So you see that big time commitment from fractional, and I think you've also seen some of those terms that clients have agreed to in fractional. But look, charters come off a little bit at acquiring aircraft, but they're still in there and well above. This is all based off of 2019. So what I also did is I looked at utilization. So this is where if you look at the curve going up for charter, the utilization went way up. Remember when we were sitting around 2021, 2022, you're looking at it at 45% growth. It looked like fractional and Part 91 or whole aircraft ownership kind of lagged a little bit. But if you see through time that they held up pretty good utilization-wise. And if you look at charter, although it's had some of its challenges, right? And we know those challenges. And it was a tough time to fill all of the, you know, I think if you look at Kenny Dichter, he was a great marketer. And then he was probably pissed when all of the uptick came into charter, right? Because he paid a shitload of money for marketing, okay? And then it didn't matter who you were at that point because everybody just looked for charter, right? Now, in some circumstances, you may have ended up with a little bit lower of an experience with some of that charter because they were older aircraft, but this is what you got. And then when I combine those and really look at asset optimization standpoint and look at how are they optimizing those assets that they have, and I look at what the utilization rate is compared to the investment rate or having that fleet size, they're all doing pretty good. I mean, obviously, again, charter has fallen off a little bit, but not much. So if you look at how the industry is doing, yes, it's healthy, and it's healthy in all sectors. And remember, fractional used to have this pyramid, right? People come in the door through charter, they experience that, they move up to fractional, then they move up to the whole aircraft. That has gone away. So now you have, they're coming in through both doors. And some of them are coming off of whole aircraft ownership. But I believe those coming off of whole aircraft ownership should have probably started at fractional to begin with. And there is some movement back and forth in these areas. So I look at this as a healthy chart. And I will turn it over to my colleague, George Ferguson.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. And thank you,
corporate jet investor, for the opportunity to speak. Yep, so I think we had 3 people answer the survey so far, because, no, I think it's 3 people, right? Because I saw 100% said yes to airlines competing with business aviation, and then someone must have answered no, and we got down to 33 and 67. So now, yeah, we have another come in. Thank you. I think it does compete. So my name is George Ferguson. I'm the Senior Aerospace Defense and Airline Analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. So I'm with Bloomberg, but I'm in the intelligence product, which of course probably brings a lot of jokes from a typical crowd. But I spend my day not in media. I spend my day doing research, much like an investment bank analyst would do on companies. So I can't get you on TV, but I can introduce you to somebody that can put you on TV if you really like to be on TV. Usually the crazier thing you do, the more likely you're going to get on there. I spend my days, though, analyzing the U.S. airlines, some European airlines, as well as the manufacturers. I analyze the big commercials, Boeing and Airbus, as well as Embraer, Bombardier, Dassault, and General Dynamics, Gulfstream. So I spent a lot of time talking to Don about the secondary market. It's good and bad, about the secondary market for biz aviation, because it matters to the primary market, right? And so what I want to bring to the discussion here before we kind of go to more of your questions was really what's happened to the U.S. airline industry, and why would it be, I guess, challenging to use it if you're running a major company, especially I think if you have to get to far-flung regions of the U.S. I'm going to be very U.S. focused. And so what I have up here for you on this simple chart is the narrow body recovery, U.S. domestic narrow body recovery since 2019. And in yellow, I have flights, and in blue, I've got seats. And what you're going to see essentially here is we've recovered to 100% of what we had prior to the pandemic. I'm using 2019 as my prior to the pandemic base year. But seats have outpaced flights. And if I showed you this number for the big U.S. full-service carriers, if I showed it to you for United, American, and Delta, what you would see today is that flights are down about 10% for 4Q, but seats are up mid-single digits. What's going on, right? Well, what's been going on is everybody loves the Airbus A321 and the Boeing 737-9, and when they can get it, the 737-10. So all of the airlines essentially in the U.S. have been upgrading to larger scale airplanes. If I showed you fares, I would show you fares that rose between 10 and 20% since 2019, which seems pretty strong, and you'd think U.S. airline profitability ought to grow based on that. But what's happened to the U.S. market is that the pilots carted away all the profits, right? So pilots got really nice increases post-pandemic, 20% plus increases, and pilots have been in pretty heavy demand. So the airlines went to larger gauge. And that larger gauge means they just can't serve some of the smaller cities. So, one of the, I think the poster child for this is going to be the regional fleet, right? So anything less than 90-ish seats, right? So I make the Embraer E190, 195, CRJ 900s. I kind of call them small narrow bodies. Everything below that, if you look at the regional flying in the U.S., again, you're going to see they haven't achieved pre-pandemic levels of flights or seats. And again, there's an upgauging going on here where seats have grown faster than flights. So again, all the airlines are really going to the same places, right? And so coming out of the pandemic, what we really saw was leisure led the recovery, and all these airlines went to larger aircraft and pointed them at a lot of the leisure destinations. So if you're a business flyer, your ability to get to the middle of the country was absolutely impacted, and probably still is. Now, if you have an interest in this, I have a webinar coming up next week where I have a pilot coming on to talk about some of the dynamics inside the pilot market. We still see heavy retirements of pilots through the next decade. I come up with about 33% in the U.S. market that have to retire in the next decade. I think he came up with about 25%. If you go follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see a notification of the webinar. We still see a real need and challenge in getting pilots, and we think that means, the regionals are usually the place where most of the pain occurs when you can't find pilots, because that's the least paid portion of the business, right? So we still think it's going to be challenging to put pilots in cockpits. The regionals will fill it, and that means connectivity is not going to be as good. This one, I just wanted to give people a sense of the recovery in business flying, at least at the airlines. The airlines have gotten cagier and cagier about telling us how much business has returned since 2019. The sense I'm getting now is they're just getting back to about 2019 levels of business travel. I think it's right around the revenue number. So I think that the volume numbers are still maybe a bit lower. Maybe they're 5 or 10% down, but they're just starting to get back. This was an example of Delta's premium revenue. One of the challenges using this metric, I show it to you here, but if you've all booked a flight recently, which you probably have because you got here, everything is premium now. I've noticed in the old days, in the back of the bus, you could take any seat you wanted. You paid whatever that price that was advertised when you tried to book the flight. And now, if you're getting anything but a middle seat, they get an upcharge. I think they try to call it premium revenue. Nonetheless, from Delta's disclosures, they're the only one that I get a lot of disclosure from, we're seeing premium revenue back up again. But I think the corporate business travel is getting close to 2019 levels of numbers. That's my disclaimer. I'm not going to read it to you, and we're happy to take your questions. I'll sit down.
When you said you're happy to take questions, is that on your disclaimer or on your slides?
On any portion of it. Of course, I wish I understood the disclaimer. Anyways.
We've got someone in the audience who's woken up in a bad mood, and they've said, what is the purpose of comparing commercial aviation and business aviation? Don.
Well, I think it's, there's really, when you look at both of those areas that they spoke about, we've heard a lot of, hey, when are they going to go back? But when's everybody going to go back? And looking at this ecosystem, especially the last slide that George showed, I think you can see where that migration during the pandemic took place. I think we've all experienced over the last decade, since the Great Recession, that business aviation was the only industry not to bounce back with all of the artificial stimulation that was given to every other industry. So if you just looked at a line going from where we should be, and maybe it should have happened a lot sooner, but that's why you see where, it's unlocked. The pandemic helped to unlock it, but there were many more factors than the simple answer of people just didn't want to get on an airplane because of COVID. I think that was one of the elements. And I do think that when you see, especially when I showed the fuel part of 2016 and that being a headwind for our industry, that's where you see people get off of the private or business aviation and they migrated over to commercial.
And Richard, do you agree?
Yeah, I love the exclamation mark as well. Too bad it's anonymous. I mean, I don't know whether Doug Golan has managed to rejoin us, but he has these great surveys, and his latest survey from his pool of BizJet users showed that only 12% of his BizJet users just fly private. Most of them do fly airline as well. And of course, it's utility. They need to get somewhere, and ultimately the service might have the frequency and reliability that allows them to fly schedule. But you saw from our numbers that and from the official numbers from the likes of Eurocontrol, it is becoming less reliable. We all know that from day to day. So yeah, there's a mix, but quite clearly there's been a shift in preference towards flying private.
And George, I think this question went up while you were speaking, but someone's saying at airlines, now we've seen airlines rebound and traffic get back to where it was. Are airlines now less likely to poach pilots and technicians? You've sort of answered that.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I don't think they're less likely. Again, we see heavy retirements in the pilot ranks. We still see heavy needs on the maintenance world. And so I think this trend just continues. I think the industry has to really start to recruit a lot of folks into the industry, show them how exciting the career is, because I think we've kind of lagged on that in the last bunch of, I guess maybe decades or something like that. Everybody'd rather work behind a computer nowadays. And so the challenge is bringing more people in, right? And I think, like during the pandemic, one of the, even as the pandemic closed, one of the big points I'd make to everybody is if, you worked as a technician at the airport, and your neighbor worked as a computer programmer, you got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, turn your lights on, so you get to the airport by 7:30, I guess, to work on airplanes. You watch your neighbor turn his lights on at 7:30 and start plunking away on a keyboard and not having to leave the house, and you went, I hate my career, right? I want to be working from home. I personally don't like working from home, but...
Why was he getting up at 7:30? I'm sure he'd get up at 9.
That's right.
Well, just to build on that real quick, if you remember back in 2019, there was a challenge with pilots for us. And it was an industry problem for business travel. Due to the pandemic, a lot of those pilots migrated over, and you can see where even recently NetJets has had to solve their issues with pilots, but they've done a pretty good job to retain their force, and that's some of the advantage of fractional. But I think pilots are a big deal. It's for those of us that know commercial pilots, they don't really have it too bad on some of their dailies. So,
which is another reason why it's worth looking at both the sectors, because not only do they compete for passengers, they compete for pilots, and in lots of places in the world, they actually compete for infrastructure. In Asia, Asian airlines are pushing out business jets and terminals.
And
so whoever asked that question, I hope you've been told now.
And you do have all the aircraft, the OEM engine manufacturers here, and this is a big deal for them too. So one other facet.
George, with regional jets aging out and A220 production stalling, how are small cities being affected? Are there opportunities for BizAv, or is that just a mirage? That's from Craig.
So I hope Airbus isn't in the room, right? Because they're going to tell you.
They are speaking next, actually. So.
They're going to tell you that A220 production is going up from here by, just above mid-decade. I think they want 15, 12 a month, something like that. It seems like a lot to me. But the crux of the question, I think, again, sorry, even RJs are getting larger. The A220 is really sort of a small, narrow body. I think in every point in aviation, when you use larger seat size aircraft, the number of markets you can serve profitably starts to fall, right? And so I think going to A220s, going to E195s, E175s, getting rid of the E145s, the 50-seaters, that just means there's going to be less connectivity. And the pilot salary, the cost of those pilots, means there's less connectivity. Now, is there opportunities for BizAv? There is. It's smaller because it costs a heck of a lot more money. And again, if you're running a business where you have manufacturing facilities in some far-flung cities in the middle of the U.S., you may come to the point where you don't want to spend 2 days to get to the middle of the U.S., and you need to use BizAv to get there.
And I guess that's another series question. Richard, do you want to have a crack following on from George? What is your view on regional aviation viability and how it affects business aviation?
Yeah, I think the regional connectivity has been completely created since 2019. There's a really interesting McKinsey study on the potential market for regional aviation mobility, particularly around some of the eVTOL newcomers, and of course Lilium was a star at some point, but it's tough times out there. But essentially,
I just wonder what happened to the aircraft model at NBAA base.
Won it, yeah. But essentially what McKinsey shows is that of journeys that are undertaken between 150 and 800 kilometers, only 8% take place by air. In the US, 85% takes place by car. So, if there were vehicles that could, obviously, aircraft that could meet that demand that's currently undertaken by car, I think there's a big opportunity.
Yeah, maybe I could just chime in too real quickly. One of the reasons I think we're seeing too the airlines increase the size of some of these aircraft is they want to put business class seats in there. and they want that business traveler. So I guess the good news, though, is if you find connectivity, you'll get better than a small seat like in a 50-seater.
And actually, we've got a poll up at the moment, and it's showing that 83%, this is depressing for those of you heading home on a flight today, 83% think the commercial flying experience is getting worse. Would anyone disagree?
I think it's terrible, to be honest with you. And not just because I'm in this industry, but I'll give you an example. I've talked to you about some of the things my sons do, right? And so one of my sons refuses to travel in the back. It's, you know, I don't have the time for that, Dad, kind of answer. And so he got stuffed into the back on a flight that was coming back, I think, from one of the Cayman Islands, wherever he was at.
Oh, no.
And it was due to one of the disruptions, and they just said, oh, well, you know, your ticket doesn't warrant for you to, because he had changed it, okay? So he changed it, it was still in first class, but whenever the occurrence happened, they said, oh, no, now they have power over you, and if you look at all the below lines, you know, they have a way out. And their refund for, I think it was a $1,200 ticket for that leg, their refund was $55. So for anybody who travels, be aware that when you change one of your legs, even though you may have paid full, you did fully refundable and everything else, just read the bottom line because you're at their mercy once you make that change. So
it sounds like tough times in the Spieth family coming back from the Caymans with bags of money. Anyways, oh, you didn't say bags of money, sorry. So I guess I would say we've seen it all through the aerospace and airline business. There's been a huge turnover in the people in the business, right? And TSA was one of them that really took a lot of pain there. I came in through Terminal A from Newark, which still seems to be having a heck of a time getting TSA screenings down. I was actually going to speak at a conference with Don last year where I was going to Vegas on Sunday night via Terminal A at Newark. Be aware of that one. It's got a lot of the low-cost airlines, so people going through just don't really know how to get their bags ready to be scanned, so there's all kinds of circuses going on. For the first time ever, I actually missed a flight because TSA was just an absolute mess on Sunday night. So this is still a challenge. I think it's getting better a little bit. Big turnover, though, has really hurt it bad.
Although the secret is when you're standing in that queue, you just have to go, this is keeping business aviation going.
Yes.
Mark's asking, airlines now securing future slots with engine OEMs further in advance to cover increase in use, as this will heavily impact on BizAv. Any comments? Or?
I mean, I think their airlines are securing aircraft further into the future, and that would include engines as well. And I hate to tell you all, right, their primary customers are the airlines, are the ones they're super focused on. You know, if we look at narrow body backlogs right now for Airbus, it's 9 to 10 years into the future. For Boeing, it's a bit less, and I can't really figure out, you know, we like to do backlogs based on production, and at Boeing, I can't see the production anymore. It's going to get better, but we look, you know, we kind of think it's 6, 7 years at least. So the backlogs are very long, and the OEMs are focused on those backlogs.
And even when you take out air show orders, you're still talking at least 5 years, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I know that those orders aren't strung together, so you can't get in anywhere in the queue, but I think at least you're out 5 years right now, kind of, to get anything in size.
Richard, easy question, and we're recording this so we can replay it next year if you're wrong. Is charter expected to remain above pre-pandemic or to continue softening?
Yeah, it's actually quite a difficult question. I mean, charter has softened. It's you know, possibly 15, 20 points in the US above 2019. In Europe, it's careering back towards 2019 levels, but it's slightly more nuanced because the charter business covers, you know, aircraft that might have a 135 operating under a management company, lots of tiny little fleets that do a little bit of charter, and the big programs. And generally, the big programs are doing well, or doing relatively better than the smaller fleets. And if the overall picture is of 23 and 24 kind of softening in the charter market, the largest charter companies are actually, like Fly Exclusive, for example, are doing better than ever and actually taking share from other charter companies. And if you're asking me for what's going ahead, I think that in the next year we'll probably see quite a sugar rush in terms of charter demand.
Don?
Yeah, I think charter is going to have its challenges. I think when you look at the MRO elements and some of the things that have been discussed yesterday, you're going to see some of those headwinds kind of show. But I do think there's a place for charter. And, fractional has done better because if you look at how it's positioned as an alternate to whole aircraft ownership, and really fitting some of the profile of the people coming back to the market or the new entrants into the market, it's just a better profile. So fractional's got, about a 3 or 5 year runway of commitment. And so I think we just saw that burst of a lot of new wealth. So we'll see how that lasts. I think in about 5 years will be a little bit more of a tell if that's going to be a strong market and if it's going to be worth the money they're investing in it now.
Quick yes or no question. Someone's asked, will other airlines look at embracing business aviation like Delta and Lufthansa? Yes, no?
Yes, as they have done before, but many of those stories haven't ended well.
No.
Actually, you can elaborate on that.
Okay. I don't think it's been a real winner for Delta. I don't really see, it's not coming through the financial statements at all. So I feel like they made an investment, didn't work out well, and they're trying to figure out how to make it look good, but it's not going to move the financial statements, I don't think.
I'm glad you weren't on just before George yesterday.
I lean a little closer to George, but maybe caught in the middle a bit. But I do think that there's been quite a bit of optimism at this event, and I think we all need to maybe just breathe in a little bit. I mean, it is better, but again, we have not recovered since the Great Recession, so we're probably where we should be if you look at it holistically.
And just final question, George. You mentioned that business travel is getting back to pre. Why has it taken so long?
I've heard different sort of anecdotal discussions from around the industry. One, I've heard consulting. I heard consultants when they went through the pandemic really learned to use video chats a lot better, and so the clients don't necessarily want to bring them in-house and have them sit there and bang on a computer. They can do it back from their home. So I think that's one of the things. I think companies have embraced video conferencing a little more too. So I think some internal company stuff is just not, it's gone internal and it hasn't, you don't fly there, you just do it over video chat. I think that's two of the reasons. But I mean, it's been kind of really hard to tease out why it hasn't bounced back as well.
Because Richard, you're anecdotally, it feels like it bounced back in business aviation quickly, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, actually, corporate flight departments have come back really slow. And it's to say, in previous kind of setbacks, whether it's the supply side or demand side, generally business travel has recovered later than leisure travel. And if we just look at BizJet activity, you can't define it just as leisure or business, but it looks like it's definitely been more of a leisure recovery than a business recovery.
Brilliant. And finally, last question. When's the next, and I just want year, not month. Everyone keeps talking about a market correction. When's the next aviation downturn coming?
What's an aviation downturn?
For you can do commercial. When are we going to see airline traffic fall significantly? And you guys can do business aviation traffic.
So we're starting to see the signs that airlines are going to go through a softer patch. We'll see. Fuel prices are down significantly, which could really save the airlines here in 4Q and next year. They can discount in order to fill airplanes, but we've seen fares rolling over, and we're starting to see Southwest, JetBlue cut capacity talked to the manufacturers about pushing out some of their deliveries. U.S. airlines were a bit overserved coming out of the pandemic because they were one of the, more they were more creditworthy because the government supported them well through the downturn, and we really bounced back well from a leisure perspective. But it looks like we're starting to see that happen. Spirit announced yesterday they're going to probably go into bankruptcy. Frontier probably has no interest in buying them, given that there's too many seats in the marketplace. We could be on the cusp. Fuel might save them.
Flight activity was down in 23 versus 22. It's down a little bit in 24 versus 23. So there's already been a correction, but I think that we've now normalized. I think that we'll see some increase in flight activity the next few years, even if overall the industry gets a bit of a correction.
I don't have enough data to answer
you can
that.
do, when's inventory going to get, when's number of pre-owned jets for sale going to get back to the levels it was at in...
Oh, the inventory, that's a tough one. I think we've kind of emptied out the inventory, and now we're building back, but there's a healthy flow. But I think it's a little MRO dependent. I think that we really need to look at how we're going to service this on the MRO side. But yeah, I don't know the inventories will build back up to where they were. It used to be if you were at 15% of active fleet for sale, that it was a buyer's market, and 10% it was a seller's market. That's probably going to shift downward, maybe 12 and 8, somewhere in that range. But I don't see it, building too far back up. We're going to start to offload on some of the older aircraft.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.